What if everything you believed about money, success, and how the world works was quietly wrong the whole time, and it took moving to the other side of the world to finally find out? I thought I had it figured out. I had a stable job, a decent apartment, a routine that felt safe. But then I packed 2 suitcases and landed in Singapore, and within the first few weeks, everything I had taken for granted just started to crack. The way people worked, the way they saved, the way they thought about time, about ambition, about what a good life actually looked like. It was not just culture shock, it was something deeper. It was the slow, uncomfortable realization that the stories I had been told about hard work and reward, about what is normal and what is possible, those stories were not universal truths. They were just the defaults of where I grew up. Singapore did not break me, it rebuilt me. And the 10 things I learned along the way? They changed how I live, how I earn, and how I see the entire world.
Point 1. Tax is not inevitable the way you think. Back home, tax season was something everyone just survived. You accepted it, you paid it, and you complained about it at dinner. Nobody really questioned whether the system itself was optional, because for most people, it felt like it was not. Then I moved to Singapore. Personal income tax here tops out at 22%, and for most people earning a normal salary, it is closer to 0 to 8%. There is no capital gains tax. There is no inheritance tax. Dividends from most investments are tax-free. The first time my accountant in Singapore walked me through my tax return, I sat there in silence. I had been giving away a third of everything I earned for years without ever asking whether that was the only way. Singapore taught me that tax is not a fixed law of nature. It is a policy choice made by governments, and different governments make very different choices. The moment you understand that, you stop seeing your income as a fixed number. You start asking bigger questions about where you live, how you earn, and what you are actually keeping at the end of every month.
Point 2. Hawker culture destroys the myth of expensive, healthy food. One of the biggest lies sold to people in expensive cities is this: eating well costs a lot of money. If you want fresh food, real ingredients, something cooked by a human being rather than a machine, you are going to pay for it. I believe that. I spent years buying overpriced salads in plastic containers because the cheap options felt unhealthy and the healthy options felt unaffordable. And then I discovered hawker centers in Singapore. For about 3 to 5 Singapore dollars, which is roughly 2 to 4 US dollars, you can sit down and eat a full meal cooked fresh in front of you. Chicken rice, laksa, char kway teow, soup, real food made by people who have been perfecting their single dish for 20 or 30 years. These are not fast food joints. They are UNESCO-recognized food heritage sites. Singapore flipped everything I thought I knew about the relationship between quality, cost, and food. It turned out the expensive healthy food myth was not a truth. It was a market, and some cities simply chose not to build that market in the first place. Point 3. Safety is not about police. It is about design. I grew up thinking that safety in a city came down to police presence, surveillance cameras, and strict laws. More enforcement meant more safety. That was the mental model. Singapore has strict laws, yes, but what struck me more was something subtler. It was the physical design of the city. Streets that are clean and well lit. Public spaces that feel shared and cared for. MRT stations that are calm rather than chaotic. Nobody leaving rubbish on the ground, not because of fear, but because the environment itself communicated that this is a place worth respecting. Researchers call this the broken windows theory in reverse. When a space looks maintained and valued, people treat it that way. Singapore seemed to have built safety into the architecture of daily life, rather than just policing it from above. I started thinking about every city I had ever lived in differently after that. The disorder I had accepted as normal was not inevitable. It was a result of choices. Choices about funding, about design, about what a city silently communicates to the people who live inside it. Point 4. Multilingualism is a superpower nobody talks about. In Singapore, it is completely ordinary to hear someone switch between 3 languages in a single conversation. English, Mandarin, Malay, Tamil. These are the 4 official languages of a country with a population of about 6 million people. Children grow up learning at least 2 languages from birth. And what I noticed was not just that people could speak multiple languages, it was that they thought differently because of it. They could move between contexts, understand different cultural frameworks, and build trust with a wider range of people than most monolingual professionals ever could. Back home, there was a quiet cultural arrogance around language, the assumption that if you speak English, the world will come to you. Singapore quietly demolished that idea every single day. I watched business deals get made in Mandarin. I watched relationships deepen through shared dialect. I started learning Mandarin seriously for the first time in my adult life, not as a hobby, but because I finally understood it as a professional and human investment. Language is not just communication, it is access. Point 5. Small countries can have the biggest ambitions. Singapore is smaller than many cities in the world. It has no natural resources, no rivers, no mountains, no oil, no farmland. When it became independent in 1965, its founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew reportedly wept because the odds seemed impossible. A tiny island nation with nothing but its people. And yet today, Singapore has one of the highest GDP per capita figures on Earth. It ranks among the top countries in the world for education, infrastructure, healthcare outcomes, and quality of life. What Singapore taught me was that scale is not destiny. The countries and cities and organizations that succeed do not win because they were born with resources. They win because of decisions. Decisions about investment in human capital, about long-term thinking over short-term popularity, about building institutions that outlast any single leader. I stopped using the size or resources of my own country as an excuse for anything after living here. Singapore had less than almost anyone and built more than almost everyone. That reframing was permanent. Point 6. CPF changed how I think about retirement. Before Singapore, my understanding of retirement savings was vague and anxious. Contribute to something, hope it grows, pray the system does not collapse before you get there. In Singapore, there is a mandatory savings system called the Central Provident Fund, CPF. Both employees and employers contribute a percentage of salary every month. The money is split into accounts designated for housing, healthcare, and retirement. Interest rates on CPF savings are guaranteed by the government and consistently higher than what most bank savings accounts offer anywhere in the world. What shocked me was not the mechanism, it was the intentionality. The system assumes that individuals alone will not save enough, so it builds the saving into the structure of employment itself. You do not have to remember, you do not have to be disciplined. The architecture does it for you. I came back from Singapore and completely rebuilt how I thought about financial systems. Not just my personal savings, but the question of what governments owe their citizens in terms of structural support versus personal responsibility. Point 7. Efficiency is a form of respect. There is a phrase I heard several times in Singapore: do not waste people's time. It sounds obvious, but living there, I understood it as something deeper than punctuality. It was a cultural value. Meetings in Singapore start on time. Agreements are honored. Bureaucratic processes that would take months in other countries take days here. The immigration authority, the tax filing system, the public services, they are designed to be fast, clear, and low friction. Every time I dealt with a slow, confusing, or broken system back in my home country, I used to think, that is just how it is. Singapore taught me that slow and confusing is a choice. It is the result of not prioritizing the experience of the person on the other side of the counter or the screen. Efficiency is not a luxury. It is a statement about whose time matters. When a government or a company or a person consistently wastes your time, they are telling you something about how much they value you. I stopped tolerating unnecessary inefficiency in my professional and personal life after Singapore. I stopped calling it normal. It is not normal. It is just common. Point 8. Housing policy is the most underrated political issue anywhere. About 80% of Singapore's population lives in public housing, called HDB flats, built and managed by the government. But here is the part that breaks most people's mental model. These are not slums or last resort housing. They are clean, well-maintained, connected to transit, affordable, and owner-occupied. Most Singaporeans own the flat they live in, and the government has designed the system so that ordinary working people can buy their home without being crushed by the market. Compare that to cities like London, Sydney, or San Francisco, where the conversation about housing is a permanent, unresolved, generational crisis. Young people unable to buy, rents consuming half of income, homelessness rising. These cities are not failing at housing because it is hard. They are failing because they have made different political choices, choices that consistently favor existing property owners over future residents. Singapore proved to me that functional housing for ordinary people is achievable. It just requires treating housing as infrastructure rather than as an investment vehicle. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in urban policy. Point 9. Meritocracy has a shadow side. Singapore talks about meritocracy seriously and genuinely. It is woven into the national identity, the idea that where you come from does not determine where you go, that talent and effort are what count. And in many real ways, Singapore lives up to that. Scholarships are fiercely competitive and genuinely open. Civil service careers are built on performance. Social mobility is higher here than in many Western countries that claim to value the same thing. But living inside a high-pressure meritocracy also revealed something uncomfortable. The competition starts early, very early. Primary school examinations that shape secondary school placement. Secondary school results that shape university access. University prestige that shapes your first job. Children as young as 9 years old carrying the anxiety of a system that is already sorting and ranking them. I saw bright, exhausted young people who had won every round of the competition and still felt afraid of falling behind. Singapore made me think harder about what meritocracy costs, who it lifts, who it grinds, and whether a society can have genuine fairness without also building in genuine rest, failure, and second chances. Point 10. The world is bigger than the story you were told. This is the one that changed everything else. Before Singapore, I understood the world primarily through the lens of where I grew up. The news I consumed, the conversations I had, the assumptions about how economies work and what governments can do, and what ordinary life looks like, all of it was filtered through one place. Singapore sits at the center of Southeast Asia. In one city, you have Chinese culture, and Indian culture, and Malay culture, and Western business influence all layered on top of each other and genuinely functioning together. You have a perspective on China that is not filtered through Washington. You have a perspective on Southeast Asian markets that most Western media completely ignores. You sit in a room for a business dinner and realize the frameworks you brought into the room are only one of 6 frameworks being held by the other people at the table. That is disorienting at first, and then it is the most freeing thing you have ever experienced. The world does not revolve around any single story, and once you feel that in your body, not just understand it intellectually, you cannot go back to thinking small. I did not move to Singapore to find answers. I moved because of a job opportunity and a restlessness I could not name at the time. But what I found was something I was not expecting. A city that forced me to examine every assumption I had carried without questioning. About money, about food, about safety, about language, about ambition, about what governments owe their people and what people owe themselves. None of the 10 things I shared with you today are small. They are foundational. They are the kind of shifts that, once they happen, reorganize everything else around them. And the most important thing I want to leave you with is this. Your defaults are not the truth. They are just the starting point you were handed. Every city you move to, every culture you sit inside long enough to understand, every system you compare against a different system, all of it is data. All of it is an invitation to update. Singapore updated me in ways I am still processing years later. And if you ever get the chance to live somewhere that unsettles your certainties, take it. That discomfort is not a problem. That discomfort is the whole point.